Hi, I'm Drew Hoffman from UC Davis Sociology. Today I'm going to talk about the question, what is the welfare state? Welfare. Just generally it means to fare well, welfare, or it means well-being. That's the meaning it had in the US Constitution, which I'll read to you, the preamble at least, not the whole Constitution, thank God. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. That's the meaning of welfare in the Constitution and the meaning in most of the rest of the world. However, that's probably not how you've been accustomed to thinking about the word welfare. In the United States, at least since the 1970s, the term has had a negative or pejorative meaning. It has mainly meant aid to poor people, aid to the poor. In the rest of the world, welfare doesn't really have that meaning. It more often means social policy or social provision, government programs that are meant to promote the well-being, the welfare of the general population. In the United States, sometimes people will now distinguish between social welfare when they're trying to talk about the social policy meaning and welfare when they're trying to talk about the aid to the poor meaning of the term. But that is an unusual usage internationally. I also want to talk about something called the welfare state. By state, I mean the government. By the welfare state, this would include government programs that attempt to promote social welfare. A more sort of narrow meaning of that term would be a government that has accepted a duty to promote the citizens' economic and social well-being. And the term the welfare state has its origins in World War II, where people in England were trying to distinguish England's welfare state from Germany's warfare state. That's really where this term comes from. There are similar terms for this in Germany, the social state, or in Sweden, the folk home. These are meant to convey this notion of the welfare state, a state that takes responsibility for the well-being of its people. There's a variety of ways to define the welfare state, and none of them are really better than others. I'm going to let you decide how to define the welfare state, but I also would like you to think about what are the different ways of doing so. A very broad definition would be all government contributions to citizen well-being. So this would include such things, this is from Linda Gordon, it includes such things as paved streets and sidewalks, highways, public transportation systems, schools, parks, tree maintenance, policing, firefighting, public water, sewerage and sewage treatment, garbage collection, food and drug regulation, pollution regulation, building inspection, and even driver testing and licensing. That would be an extremely broad definition of the welfare state. It's a definition that most scholars of the welfare state do not use. Instead, most people use a narrower definition. The most narrow is programs that provide cash or services to citizens. And the classic 6 programs that people studied when they studied the welfare state are workers' compensation, unemployment insurance, sickness insurance, health insurance, old age pensions, and aid to the poor and disabled. More recently, people have sometimes included programs such as family allowances, maternity leave, family leave, and child care. There's also a debate about whether other types of policies should be considered part of the welfare state. For example, education, labor market policy, taxation, macroeconomic policy, in other words, the way that the economy is run and whether it promotes full employment or not. Tax expenditures, which is when the government gives people a tax break if they do something that's good for them. There are tax breaks in the United States for the purchase of health care, for the purchase of a home, for contributing money to a private pension. So these are some forms of tax expenditures. This is a topic we'll talk about quite a bit in this course. Some people have argued that litigation, where people can sue an employer or a product producer for some sort of harm, is part of the welfare state. Some people have argued that equal opportunity law, which provides equal opportunities for different racial and ethnic groups, for women, for people with disabilities, is also considered part of the welfare state. And lastly, some people on the left like to call things such as farm subsidies or corporate subsidies, they like to call it corporate welfare, and thus define that as part of the welfare state as well. I think a really good definition comes from Olson. It's sort of a three-part definition. First, the welfare state provides protection against contingencies. Contingencies is just another word for like bad shit that could happen to you. Things like poverty, unemployment, disability, sickness, or old age. A second definition in some countries, not so much in the United States, is providing for full employment. This is especially the case in Sweden. And then a last meaning of it relates to providing greater equality. And again, this is only sometimes. Greater equality maybe through income redistribution and also through an attempt to ensure equal opportunity through the reallocation of various life chances. So this is really the definition I think I favor, though I'm not going to require you to favor it. You can also talk about different components of the welfare state. So three main components, one having to do with income security and income maintenance. Mainly this is cash that's provided to people. So this is in the form of family allowances or old age pensions or unemployment benefits or aid to the poor, public assistance. A second variety of aid is in the form of goods and services. It's called in-kind aid. So this would be things like food stamps or school meals. These are cases where the government is providing an actual good to the person. Food stamps, school meals, subsidized housing, prescription drugs, child care, elder care, health care, education, labor market training, things like that. And then lastly is regulatory legislation that attempts to regulate the labor market or the behavior of companies, that attempts to protect workers. So this is things like the minimum wage, regulations about health and safety in the workplace. Some countries have a requirement that employers provide a certain amount of vacation to their workers. We don't have that in the United States, unfortunately. And then also things, laws that restrict child labor, things like that. Okay, so these are sort of three dimensions: cash, goods and services, and regulation. In the Olson reading, there's a breakdown of something he calls the welfare system. And I want to distinguish that from the welfare state. So the welfare system would be a way of providing for all the needs of the population through a variety of entities, not just through the government, but through other entities as well. And so the welfare state would be part of the welfare system. So let's talk about this. First is the notion of the public sector. So these are government-provided programs and initiatives. We start with the welfare state, and this is very similar to the previous slide where we talk about cash transfers, in-kind goods and services, and lastly, protective legislation. So we've talked about that. But another category related to the public sector is fiscal welfare. These are tax deductions and credits that are provided to people for a variety of needs that they may have and also for a variety of behaviors that the government is trying to promote. So there are tax credits for having a child, for taking care of the elderly or the disabled. And as I mentioned earlier, there are tax credits available if you buy a home, if you pay for your own health care premiums, if you provide money to your retirement fund, and also tax credits for helping you to get an education. So in this public sector, we have direct expenditures by the government in behalf of the people, and on the other hand, we have various tax breaks that are given to people so that they will do certain beneficial things for them. All right, we move to the next sector, the private sector. The United States is unusual in that a lot of welfare benefits are provided within the private sector. Most other countries are mainly providing these benefits through the government. And there's two categories here. One has to do with employment-based welfare. You might refer to these as fringe benefits. These are benefits that are provided by employers. Sometimes employers are mandated to provide these benefits. Other times they do them voluntarily. Often the employers receive some sort of tax benefit for providing these things. So this would be things like a company pension plan, or when the company provides you with medical insurance, or the company helps pay for you to go get some higher education. A second form of welfare in the private sector is welfare that people buy in the market. Individuals or groups might buy it. Often, again, in the United States context, there is some sort of tax advantage or tax break provided if you are doing this sort of buying. So many people who do not receive health insurance for their employer, for example, might instead buy health insurance as individuals in the individual insurance market. They might buy life insurance. They might buy daycare for their kids or nursing home care for their elderly parents. So these are welfare needs that are being provided within the private sector, within the market, but they're not being provided by employers. Instead, individuals are buying these services. And then the last grouping is the civil sector. These are, and this is broken into two sections, community welfare and informal welfare. Community welfare is social assistance that's provided by various nonprofit organizations. This sort of care is actually being subsidized by the tax deduction for charitable contributions. So when we make charitable contributions to these various organizations, we receive a tax benefit for doing so, and that causes us to contribute more. So the government is actually subsidizing this type of welfare provision through that tax benefit. These types of organizations provide a variety of services: healthcare, housing, home care, educational activities, counseling, etc. And then the last sector, which it may be unusual to think about this as part of the welfare system, is informal welfare. These are the benefits, goods, and services and the social support that family providers or other informal groups provide to each other. Caring for a child, caring for an elderly parent, things like that. In some welfare states, there is a strong preference for doing most welfare provision within the informal welfare sector. Germany in particular has had this concept of subsidiarity, that the government will not do anything that the family can do. It prefers to have the family do it. But I want to point out now that when subsidiarity is in effect and families are the main providers of these services, women are the main providers of these services, given the division of labor within most families. So a state that focuses on subsidiarity, there are clear gender implications to that focus. And we'll talk more about that in the remainder of the course. Now, I want to finish by talking about a critique of the welfare state concept. This is a critique I first became aware of because a grad student in one of my courses raised it, and I was a little embarrassed actually when he raised it. But I've come to become quite persuaded by it. It means that I have resolved to stop using the term welfare state. You'll see that I will totally fail in that resolve. I can't stop using the term, and I guess I need to figure out why I want to use it so badly. Here's the critique. When we examine something that we're going to call a welfare state, there's an assumption in there that that state is there to promote the citizens' well-being. But that may or may not be true. States do lots of things that don't benefit their citizens. It also sort of brackets other things that states might do. They might protect the rich and the powerful. They definitely make wars. They keep order. They incarcerate people. They may pass laws that maintain inequalities of various sort. So to call something a welfare state, sort of, it's putting the cart before the horse. You're assuming it's a welfare state when in fact it might not really be promoting the welfare, at least not in everything it does. Another critique here, whenever I go to England, people will say to me, oh, so you study the welfare state? Why do you study that? Because the United States doesn't have a welfare state. And for the longest time, I didn't understand what they were talking about. I mean, clearly the United States has all sorts of welfare programs, a large social security system, large healthcare system, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the distinction they're trying to make is that the U.S. has a variety of welfare policies, but not a welfare state. And by that, they mean that the U.S. government has not accepted a duty to provide a minimum subsistence to its people. And you would need to take on that responsibility to be considered a true welfare state. Moreover, the United States is often accused of being mainly a warfare state, especially in recent years. So a lot of people argue that instead of using the term welfare state, we should use the term social provision or the term social policy, because these don't make an assumption about whether these programs are actually benefiting people or not, whether they promote equality or not, whether they promote well-being, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll try to use these terms, but I will fail, but that's okay, I guess.